مساء الخير من دبي التي بدأت تعود الحياة إليها تدريجياً مع الحفاظ على أمان وسلامة المواطن والوافد تحت إشراف مشدد من الدولة. إنه بالتأكيد عام لا يشبه غيره بالنسبة لكافة القطاعات التي هي بحاجة ماسة للانتعاش الفوري بعد مرحلة النجاة والمحافظة على الوضع الاقتصادي الراهن. سوف أبدأ الليلة تقييم قطاع الأزياء والرفاهية من خلال لقاء مطول مع أحد أكثر الشخصيات النافذة والموثوقة. الجميل في قصة هذا المؤسس أنه استطاع تحويل مدونة صغيرة إلى أحد أهم المراجع في العالم الرقمي في كل ما يتعلق باقتصاد الأزياء التي تعد من الأكثر تأثيراً. كيف استطاعت هذه الشركة الإعلامية الناشئة بيع حصص أقلية للفاينانشال تايمز بالإضافة لجولة تمويل ثانية من الداعمين الحاليين بما في ذلك إندكس فينتشرز وفيليكس كابيتال؟ أسس عمران آمد الرئيس التنفيذي ورئيس التحرير شركته بزنس أوف فاشن في العام 2007 كمدون ليس لديه أي خبرة في مجال الأزياء، مع أكثر من 5 ملايين زائر و35 ألف مشترك. تعد الشركة اليوم رائدة في مجالها. نتابع معا هذا اللقاء الذي أجريناه مع عمران آمد.
First of all, one of the talks that you had, I believe last week, where the topic was how COVID-19 has become the Great Accelerator, particularly in the fashion industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about this topic and what's your take on it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I haven't been to Dubai for many years now, so it's nice to have a chance to connect with our readers and with you. I think the Great Accelerator, the reason I started calling it that is because I think, certainly this situation, the pandemic has created a kind of existential crisis for the fashion industry in many respects, but the facets of that crisis are actually it's nothing new. A lot of the issues that we're grappling with, aside from the public health emergency, are issues that at least we at BOF, and I think the industry more widely, has been thinking about and talking about for a long time. Mm-hmm. So when you hear people talking about, new digital adoption, or if you hear people talking about, a more sustainable fashion industry, or even more recently, if you hear people talking about creating more inclusive industry, these are, any regular reader of BOF will know that these are issues that we've been talking about for a number of years. I think what's happened over the last few months is that the issues went from the periphery of the fashion industry right to the heart of the fashion industry. And so the conversations we're having now, COVID has really accelerated those conversations. And then finally, our industry is an industry that, reaches customers around the world. And, last year we did a study into the representation of different groups of people at the highest echelons of the fashion industry. And if you look at the boards and the executive committees of most fashion companies, they don't really reflect the customers that they are reaching. And so, of course, with the Black Lives Matter movement that has taken off first in the US and now spread around the world, I think there's a real reckoning happening inside small and large fashion companies to figure out how we can be more inclusive and representative in terms of the way we hire and promote people in our organization. So on all of these 3 dimensions, COVID has accelerated these conversations. They're not new conversations, but they've taken on a greater level of urgency.
Obviously, customer relations is something that I'm very interested in, and how brands should be reaching out to their customers post this pandemic. What I would like to discuss right now is that there's no doubt that this has caused a disruption in the fashion industry. Do you forecast new business models emerging out of this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, when you look back at historical moments, not exactly like this, but similar to this, where there's a crisis. I think back to 2008 during the global financial crisis, we saw all sorts of new business models emerge at that time. If you remember things like the flash sales from Gilt Group or Rue La La or all of these companies, a lot of that happened and flourished during the last crisis because there was, as there is now, a lot of excess merchandise available. I think it's inevitable that this time as well, that we'll see new business models emerge. Exactly what they'll be, I don't know, but hopefully there'll be business models fixed around addressing some of the challenges that we've been discussing.
What I absolutely love is that I have been watching the attitude of big luxury brands shift. I feel communication-wise, they have become more accessible. They have become more human with their messages. I feel they came down from their pedestals where they impose these messages on us in finding ways to communicate with their customers. And this is where I want to take your opinion on how important is it right now for luxury brands to find the right language to reach out to their clients, to their existing clients, tell their stories, and how different should it be now than the way that it was before the pandemic?
Yeah, again, I think, with the arrival of social media on the scene about 10 years ago, that was when luxury brands were first kind of contending with the idea that the communication around the industry wasn't something that they could just control, which is how, things had worked for decades. The brands and the big magazines would tell consumers, this is in style, this isn't in style, this is how you should dress, this is the color you should wear, this is the hem length, this is, the brands were focused on kind of trying to control the conversation. And I think over the last 10 years or so, they've become more adept at using these new channels. However, I think they're still approaching social media and these channels as very controlled conversations. And I think what's interesting is to see how they can spend more time listening to what customers are saying and not just telling their customers.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. In terms of content creation, as a journalist, how did this phase impact your work, and how did you manage coming up with relevant concepts, reaching out to relevant people? How difficult was it for you?
I mean, I think it's been difficult for everybody. So, we are no exception. When it became clear exactly how serious this situation was and how challenging it will continue to be for the industry, we took a position to say, okay, well, what's our role as BOF during this time? And the analogy I gave to my team is that we should be guides. No one's going to know exactly what it's going to look like on the other side. So I used the, Sherpas, which are these people who guide people on these mountain expeditions, and you don't know exactly where you're going to end up. You don't know what challenges you're going to face along the way. But the Sherpas are there to help guide you. They understand the terrain, they understand some of the different things that might happen. And that's kind of how we've been approaching our role at BOF. We also had to pivot parts of our business. We had a big set of activities at BOF that was built all around live events in person, and we had planned an event in Brazil and an event in New York and our 500 gala and, Voices, which is our conference that we do in December. And obviously all of those things have become very, very difficult to execute during this time. So, to the credit of our events team, we quickly said, okay, well, if we can't do physical events, we have to do something. And we started doing weekly live events while staying true to our mission, which is always to open, inform, and connect the global fashion industry.
Obviously, this is what all of us need to do in order to remain relevant and survive this phase for sure. What I would like to discuss is the master classes done by BOF. How important are they, and in your opinion, what role does education play today, and how important is it more than ever?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we first launched our master classes about 5 years ago. And the goal was really to go deeper on some of the kind of articles and series that we had been doing in writing and take them into a kind of more interactive video online learning format. And those classes have been really popular, but what we saw happen when the pandemic started, all of a sudden people had all this time on their hands, and some of these courses that we've designed, they take 7 or 8 hours to complete. And so there was a massive increase in the number of people taking these courses, and we've realized that actually because
there's an opportunity here.
Yeah,
big opportunity here. Yeah,
big opportunity because so many people are sitting back and they're reevaluating their careers, and they're thinking, how am I going to use this time? What's this pandemic going to mean for me when it's all over? How is it going to change my career? What new skills do I need to learn? One
of the interesting topics that came out of these classes that I saw on BOF is the fact that I believe in one of them, there was a discussion about the rise of a potential monopoly when it comes to the market, with these small businesses that will find it very difficult to kind of remain in business, and the decision and the power will go to the big players. How do you see this shift in this market for this particular issue that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that always happens during an economic crisis like the one we're in is that it's a bit Darwinian, right? It's about survival of the fittest. And survival of those who are able to adapt best to the new circumstances. And in many cases, especially in an industry like ours, where there are these very, very big players, those companies have the balance sheet and the resources to weather the storm. And they are much more able in many cases to find ways of making the current situation, if not, replace, the old ways of working, but find other ways of doing things to get through the situation. Whereas you have a lot of companies in the fashion industry which are, much more fragile. And some of those companies are big companies, by the way. They're not necessarily small companies, but so much of the economic profit in the fashion industry is created by such a small group of players.
How will this impact emerging designers, brands, and how will it impact the creativity in our industry if we are going through a monopoly where only the big players have a say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real concern, right? Because something like 80% of fashion companies are in some kind of form of financial distress right now, because the lockdowns have lasted 3 months now effectively. And I think about some of those really small creative businesses that bring some of the really amazing energy. If you think about Jonathan Anderson and his rise 10 years ago, he was like a fledgling designer with a business that was fully independent. He didn't know all that much about building a business. And now of course he's a creative director of Loewe, and he's got LVMH backing his own business. But I worry about the Jonathan Andersons of today who won't be able to make it through this period. And I worry about the impact that has on the overall creativity of our industry, because a lot of the innovation, just as in many businesses, many sectors, innovation often happens in smaller organizations, because big companies they're not necessarily
exactly my point.
Make change.
Yeah.
So we need to support the young creative businesses in our industry.
Another very important topic, which I believe you mentioned also, is the fact we constantly want the fashion industry to be more sustainable, to be slower. However, there is a whole ecosystem of an industry where the livelihood of a lot of people depends on the way that it functions. What is your take on this?
Yeah, last week we had a summit that I mentioned, and we had an amazing woman named Kalpona Akhtar speak at the summit. She is like the voice of 4 million garment workers in Bangladesh. And what I took away from what she said is she said we want these jobs, but we want jobs with dignity.
This is the time for all of us to work together, make things changes. The thing we want, and I'm campaigning for the Bangladeshi workers or any production country workers, they are looking for, that is only one thing, a job with dignity.
Unfortunately, there are still a lot of circumstances where people are working in conditions that are just, frankly unacceptable, and this pandemic has been extremely hard on the most vulnerable people in our supply chain. It's just exposed a lot of challenges and problems and inequality in our supply chain, where all of the value that's created, most of it is just going to big companies. With regards to the pace of the industry and the amount of stuff that's produced, I mean, that's a much bigger challenge, right? So these companies have been geared up to basically churn out a lot of product that people won't wear very often, and which just gets discarded. And I think fundamentally that model is just not sustainable. The idea that, as an industry, we produced 114 billion garments of clothing last year. And in the US, people are buying on average 60 pieces of clothing each every year, 20 billion garments in total, means that, people are just throwing things away. And so it goes back to that point I was discussing earlier, which is I think there's a reset that can happen around the way we engage with customers in our industry and the way we create clothing so that it lasts longer, it can be worn more often, it doesn't go out of style so quickly. And we just change the whole dialogue around fashion.
What I want to know from you is, how are you using your platform, and what advice would you give to other journalists and content creators that want to use their platforms to empower, keep the conversations going, and ultimately make a difference in their communities?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think right now having a voice like the one we have at BOF comes with a great set of responsibilities as well. And, we recognize that, when we drop a little pebble into a still lake, it creates ripples. And we want to make sure that those ripples are constructive. I think right now there's a lot of outrage on the internet. There's a lot of cancel culture and screaming and shouting, which ultimately I don't think is a very constructive way to address problems. What I would love to see our industry do more is to have the conversations openly and constructively, while also listening, because when everyone's shouting all the time, I think we have a tendency to stop listening. And in order to address some of these very complex challenges that we have in front of us, we also need to listen. So having a community like the one we have at BOF, which is a global community, which is representative of the entire fashion industry, which is reflective of a very diverse set of customers and stakeholders in the industry, we can bring, that group of people together and have those conversations. And that's fundamentally what the goal of BOF has always been, is to kind of open, inform, and connect the fashion industry and inject the right thinking, the right questions, even tough questions,
Yeah.
so that people can't shy away from them.
Well, thank you so much for putting that content out there. I constantly question my decisions every single time I read a piece, and it's very constructive. And I thank you for giving us the time to reach out to your readers in the Arab world. I hope I see you very soon, maybe in Dubai.
I hope so.
Let's hope for a better 2021, and I'll see you very soon. Thank you so much, Imran.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.